As we continue on with notes in Kingdom Animalia, today we're going to talk about the um, sponges and the Cnidarians and three different phyla of worms. Please use your packet to take notes. You have inside your packet some tables that you can fill in. Most of the information will be on the slides that follow in the notes recording, and you can record. You can write things down there, and whatever you don't get from the recording, we will talk about in class. Some of it's already completed for you, and other things you need to fill in. So the first phylum we'll talk about is phylum Porifera, the pore-bearing organisms. They are the sponges. Sponges are very, very simple. They are just barely animals. They meet the criteria for being animals because they are multicellular, they're eukaryotes, they're heterotrophs, and they have no cell walls. They also have no tissues. You don't have to worry about germ layers with them because they don't have all those three germ layers. They're very, very simple. Most of the sponges are sessile, means they are stuck to the bottom. They don't move around. They have some cells inside them called choanocytes that do move and create a current to bring water through the pores for them to filter things out of the ocean water. But that's really all they do. Very, very simple. We saw a video about sponges that showed how they filter things out, and that's also on the Edmodo attachment. The next phylum is phylum Cnidaria. These are the stinging animals. They have specialized cells called cnidocytes that allow them to sting. If you've ever touched a jellyfish at the beach, you know what that feels like. This includes the jellyfish, the sea anemones, the corals, and a few other organisms like hydroids. Cnidaria are radially symmetrical. They are diploblastic, meaning they have two germ layers, ectoderm and endoderm. They do have tissues. They have stinging cells, those cnidocytes, on their tentacles for feeding. The tentacles usually surround the mouth. They have a gastrovascular cavity rather than a true digestive system with only one opening. We can call it the mouth or the anus, usually call it the mouth. And they often exhibit two different body forms. The picture you see here on this slide are coral polyps. These are the actual coral animals that make the coral skeleton that you see when you look at a coral reef. Each one of the little pits in the coral has one of these little animals in it, and they're basically like little miniature sea anemones, very, very similar in structure and shape. Cnidarians are characterized by two different body forms, the asexual polyp form, like you see here in the sea anemone, that has the mouth at the top, surrounded by the tentacles. Most of these are sessile, although there are a few that can move around. And the second form, the sexual form, is called the medusa. It's basically the polyp turned upside down. So the mouth is at the bottom, surrounded by the tentacles. This is the stage that can move around from place to place. Very, very different kind of organisms. This is the typical jellyfish structure that you see in jellyfish. Now, a lot of cnidarians undergo an alternation of generations, somewhat like we saw in plants. But basically, in animals, alternation of generations alternates between an asexual stage where the animal can reproduce asexually. This particular one does by budding. It makes a group of polyps that just bud off of each other. And then it sometimes produces a reproductive polyp that produces the medusa. And the medusa have gonads that can undergo meiosis and produce eggs and sperm, which are shed into the ocean. Fertilization occurs just kind of randomly there, and a zygote will grow into a larva called a planula that has flagella that can move from place to place until it finds a good place to settle down, and then it attaches to the bottom and develops into a new polyp stage. Most of the life cycle here is spent in the diploid phase. The only haploid part is in the gamete stage. The next groups of animals are called worms, and there are three different phyla of worms. The worms begin the groups of animals that are triploblastic, that have all three germ layers. These three phyla of worms represent the three different kinds of body plans. The platyhelminthes, or flatworms, are acoelomates. The nematodes, or roundworms, are the pseudocoelomates, and the annelids, are segmented worms, are the true coelomates. So we'll look at each one of these in turn. The platyhelminthes are the flatworms, which include planaria, like we saw a video of, and the flukes and the tapeworms. They are acoelomates. They do have all three germ layers, but they do not have a body cavity. Their digestive system is a gastrovascular cavity. It has only one opening. It is branched. They depend on diffusion to take care of their circulation and respiration needs. Most of these animals live in water or very moist environments, and they're very thin, and so it's pretty easy for them to take care of their needs that way by diffusion. They do have specialized cells called flame cells to remove nitrogen waste from their body fluid, sort of like your kidneys do, and so this is how they take care of their excretory needs. In terms of reproduction, these animals are hermaphrodites. That means they have both sexes in the same body. Another term for hermaphrodite is monoecious, and you'll sometimes see this term. Now, I want to clear up something right here at the very beginning, because we'll talk about other animals that are hermaphrodites as well. That doesn't mean that they self-fertilize. What it means is these animals are usually animals that live solitary lives. They don't often come in contact with other members of their species, and so when they do, it is a big advantage to be able to exchange gametes with whichever member of their species they happen to come across. So like I said, they do not generally self-fertilize. They trade gametes with other members of their species when they come across them. There are, in a lot of these animals, these are bilaterally symmetrical. They have developed cephalization, or the development of a head region. And this is a really important advance that you see in most every phylum that we'll talk about from here on out. Some of them also have eye spots. They're not true eyes. They are responsive to light and lets them detect light. Generally speaking, they do not like light, and so by being able to detect light, they can move away from it into a safer environment. There are free-living platyhelminthes and parasitic ones. The free-living ones live in water or moist soil, and they're carnivores. They eat various other kinds of things that live in the water. The example that we will talk about is the Cnidarians we saw a video of. And the parasitic ones include tapeworms and flukes. Now, tapeworms have a very interesting looking head or scolex that lets them attach to the intestinal wall of their host. They do not have a digestive system because they absorb pre-digested nutrients directly from their host, and they shed their eggs in the feces of the host and can reinfect other hosts in the larva form by burrowing through the skin and then migrating to the muscles where they develop cysts. If another animal eats the muscle of that infected animal, and the meat hasn't been cooked, then the cysts can then grow through another life cycle stage and end up in the digestive system of the host, where they burrow in and start a whole new life cycle. Flukes work similarly to that, except rather than infecting the digestive system, they infect the circulatory system or the liver. Here's a picture of a tapeworm. This shows you the scolex that has suckers and hooks that allow it to attach to and burrow into the digestive wall of the host. And then they develop all these little body segments. Each one of these body segments, called a proglottid, has both male and female reproductive structures in there. And basically, they do self-fertilize, and they become a sack of eggs that can break off and be passed through the feces of the host and then infect other hosts in the way we described earlier. Flukes are blood parasites. Here's a human blood fluke, and that's microscopic, but then here's a sheep liver fluke that is obviously not. 4.5 centimeters is a pretty big fluke. So, but they do infect their hosts through by the larva burrowing into the skin and then migrating to the part of the body that they will parasitize. The second group, or second phylum of worms, are the nematodes. Nematodes are roundworms. They are the only phyla that are pseudocoelomates. They have all three germ layers and a partial body cavity, but not a complete true body cavity of the true coelom. They have a complete digestive system, which has a mouth and a digestive tube and an anus. It's still pretty simple, but it does pass all the way through them. They have two openings. Their circulatory, respiratory, and excretory needs are taken care of by diffusion. Most members of this phylum are parasites. They live in moist environments in their host, usually, or in the soil. Most are dioecious. That means they have two sexes rather than just one. And this is the only group, like I said earlier, that has a pseudocoelom. They also have a cuticle, which is a tough outer covering that helps protect them from the environment they might possibly be in. These are, like I said, most of these are parasites. Ones that you may have heard of or may encounter are the ascaris, which is an intestinal parasite of pigs and man, and I think you also find ascaris in sheep and goats and cattle. Other kinds of parasites include hookworms, which can parasitize mammals of various kinds. They have this nasty looking mouth with these hooks that kind of burrow into the intestinal wall. And things like heartworms and other kinds of worms that your animals might have. If you've ever had to give your puppies worming medicine, or if you have cattle or sheep and have to give them worming medicine, this is the kind of worms that you're fighting against, is hookworms, including the heartworms that your dogs and cats might get. The third group of worms is the annelids, or segmented worms, and this includes earthworms as well as clamworms, which are aquatic, and leeches. They have a complete digestive system that has specialized regions like a gizzard and a crop, so they're much more advanced than the other worms we talked about. They have a closed circulatory system, which means they have blood enclosed in blood vessels, which is really an advanced feature. They undergo respiration by diffusion because they do live, they're still fairly small and they live in moist environments and have thin skin, so it's easy for them to exchange gases through their skin. For excretion, they have structures called nephridia that take the place of kidneys for them to filter out nitrogen waste from their body fluids. They are generally hermaphrodites. Again, they do not self-fertilize. They swap eggs with another member of their species that they come across. They can even store the eggs for a while until they fertilize and hatch them. Unique among a lot of the invertebrates is they do have blood that has hemoglobin, which is normally only found in vertebrates. They also have, and some of them have a well-developed head region, and they all have segmented bodies. Here we have a polychaete, which is a marine annelid, and a fanworm, which is another type of marine annelid, and here is a leech. Now, leeches are kind of disgusting. We see them sometimes in movies when somebody dives in the water and comes out with leeches all attached to them. But they're also pretty useful in medicine. They were used for a long period of time in medicine when doctors believed that people were inhibited by bad blood, and so they would bleed them to remove some of the bad blood from their body to help them get well. But nowadays, they're still used in medicine in some applications. If you ever have a limb that gets severed, like you lose a finger or an arm, and your limb gets reattached, oftentimes they'll use leeches to help maintain blood flow in their reattached limb because they have an anticoagulant in their saliva that can prevent the blood from clotting and help the development of blood vessels as the limb is reattached. This is the end of the notes on sponges and Cnidarian and worms. Make sure that you have filled in the chart on the second page of your notes packet, and if you have any questions about things, we'll go over those in class. There are a few things we'll add. There are also a couple of worksheets that we'll do in class. If you're not going to be in class, you need to try to do as much as you can of the worksheet on sponges and hydra, and on flatworms, roundworms, and segmented worms. If there's some things that you can't complete, we will get that done in class and get you caught up to where you need to be.